So one of the problems I'm going to come up against in this conversion is engine monitoring sensors. So the ECU has some monitoring sensors. I can easily wire in to the factory sensors on the block, no problem. But I have the 6-gauge sports touring wagon, whatever you want to call it, instrument cluster from the original car, which is all analog. So the main ones I need to get working are the engine coolant temperature on the dash working and the oil pressure gauge. They're both factory gauges in the instrument cluster. So obviously the EJ doesn't have a oil pressure gauge sender, and the temperature sender, the scale is wrong for my dash, which is a common problem when you're doing swaps like this. So this is the oil pressure sender and has a single wire grounded through the block, and same with the temperature sender that you went in the old intake manifold grounded through the block. They only drive the needles in the instrument cluster. So I'm going to get an adapter made for this to screw that into one of the oil galleries on the EJ block. Now this is one of the oil gallery plugs. There's 4 of them on the top of the engine, and so this one is on the driver's side right behind the throttle body. It's a fair way down there. So take this and this to a machinist mate of mine, and I'm going to try and get him to get his opinion on what we can do. But I think what we're going to do is drill and counterbore a hole in here and put a tiny through hole all the way through, drill and counterbore that, and then make an adapter out of hex bar or something so I can get a socket over it, and sit that into the little counterbored hole in there and silver solder it on there, or maybe we weld it on there, and then I'll be able to screw it into the block with a socket, and in the end of that bit of hex bar is going to have the thread for this. That's the plan anyway. And for the temperature sender, I've got a gauge adapter or sensor adapter coming to put in line with the 16mm heater hoses. It's just a barb on each end with a threaded bit in the middle perpendicular to the flow of the coolant. So we're going to modify that as well to take this M16 by 1.5 thread. This is the original sender, and we'll screw that in line with the heater hoses, and that will sort out my dash gauges. A little something like that. So just barely had enough space in between the end of this barb and the end of this barb. What can you do when you're customizing? You have to work with the space you got, and that's the custom heater tap that I made out of a London taxi heater tap. This being a bypass type tap, so this will always get a good read, and just when I turn the heater on, I'll get heater coolant flowing past there still and back out there, so it's going to be good enough for the dash needle, I think. So this is what we came up with for the oil pressure sender off the old engine to make my dash gauge work. That's the old oil gallery plug, silver soldered onto a bit of hex bar with the BSP thread in the top and a through hole. So the only problem I can see is the oil gallery plugs are on the top of the engine, so this is going to be standing up like this on top of the engine, so there's going to be air trapped in here. There's no way to bleed the air out, and will that be a problem? I don't know. Shrug. This is, after all, just a fluid pressure sender, and I don't think it matters if the fluid happens to be air or oil. I think it should still work, but I guess we'll just have to see, won't we? Well, it's in there. I reckon it's just gonna work, but man, is it tight. So close. I just can't do it. I took the breather hose off and the bracket there, but I still just can't get the spanner on because of that bolt head right there. I did it. Don't know how I did it, but I did it. Managed to squeeze a spanner under there. Got about 1/8 of a turn each time I had to move the spanner. It involved me lying flat across, my feet off the ground, head down there, resting on the master cylinder, and man, am I sore now. all scratched up. It's amazing what you can do when you're determined enough, how much pain you can ignore. I had to do it up as tight as I possibly could because there's a copper washer under the plug, the original plug that we had to crush down, and then the tapered thread as well had to seal with the thread tape. So I was tightening up, I was crushing the copper washer with the hex on the sensor itself. So man, I had to put as much into it as I possibly could. I can't do any more. So if that leaks, I will need to make a custom spanner to get on that. Now it's time to sit down at the kitchen table and start terminating some wiring. Now basically I'm going to be putting these two plugs on the main engine harness. I've had this laid out in the car, plugged these in and marked where I want the junction to be, so it's going to be about there somewhere. Obviously I'm going to stagger all my crimps so they're not all bundled up in one spot, making a big fat part of the harness. They're going to be together like that. This will get trimmed off, and I've got a small breakout somewhere near the firewall for air temp, fuel pressure, the tacho input into my dash is in the engine bay, so that's in there. The fuel pump and all that's all in here. And sensor ground and sensor 5 volt. And obviously that's my wideband oxygen sensor, goes to the exhaust. So there's my grommet, which is going to stay where it is. I've got some nice Raychem DR25 for the harness and the Raychem SCL for the crimps. This is the glue line stuff. This isn't glue line, but it's really abrasive resistant. Actually feels like rubber, but it's actually heat shrink. Got my wiring diagrams, my wiring table, my tools and crimps and everything. Let's put on some music and get to it. And this is the process that I'm using. Splicing my wires one by one. I'm consulting my hand-drawn diagram for which wire in the plug. Then looking at this list to see which Haltech wire it goes in. Then I find the wires in here. I'm trimming them to be, sorry about the yucky finger, trimming them about to be roughly in the right place. Then I get one of my crimps, barrel crimps, open barrel crimps, they look like that. For individual wires I'm using these tiny ones, like this. Then I cut myself a bit of Raychem, what is it, SCL, the glue line stuff, goes over the wire. I poke the wires in my little barrel crimp and use a tool like this to close it, and then shrink down the heat shrink. And there we have it. The two plugs are on the loom. I've got some nice heat shrink there. I'm not going to shrink that down yet until I know it's all finished. This tape that's on here, it's the good quality Hellerman Titan stuff. I can take that off if I need to change anything in there. I did end up using probably half a number of pins that are in here, but it's going to look factory. And I've just got this to do, which is just extraneous stuff that didn't need to go into the engine harness on the back of the engine there. So it turned out quite neat. So this is all the bits I snipped out today, and this is all the wiring that came in the kit that I don't even need. That's all stuff that I've depinned and pulled out of the loom. I'll hold on to that in case I need to add wires in at a later date. I've got the ends on them already. But yeah. Have I made any mistakes? Well, I guess we'll find out.